But maybe, wait, maybe I'll say like this, that some rabbis say that after your wedding, your first time you're with your wife, you should intend to do this for Kiddushin, so that in case there was something wrong with the ring, or somebody comes and says, oh, wait a second. So you had another form of Kiddushin with your wife. But that's only the first.
You don't have any Edom, it doesn't work.
Well, we'll see. It's a Beit Shmuel. We'll see. We'll see about Edom. But yeah, you're right.
I do have a slight problem with that idea of like reacquiring every single time you do it, because like the way it's perceived, at least in my opinion, is that it's a legal obligation from the husband to the wife, right? You're giving something that you owe her, so I don't think that could be used as a kinyan. Like it would just be like.
No, what about Bia as a form of kinyan? How does that?
So that's different.
But that's what I'm talking about.
Right, but the first one is a kinyan, but the subsequent ones within the marriage, it's not a kinyan. It's something you owe to your wife. It's a legal obligation you have to.
That's also true. That just because that's true doesn't mean it's not also an act of kinyan. But I agree with you. This idea that I'm saying is sort of way out there, wacko idea that I just, going through my head, but it's not. I don't have no proof for it. But let's get to I see that Rav Landis. I was sort of waiting for him, but I don't think he's here.
So he's here.
He's here. Oh, okay. So let's start. Let me share my screen. I sent you out a new source sheet. Here, let me. Share screen. Okay. There. So here I said, does intercourse create marriage when not accompanied by specific intent? What I mean by that is, you're just having relations with a woman, and I'm speaking from the perspective of a man only because, partially because I'm a man, but also because that's the attitude of the Talmud towards marriage. It seems to be an act that the man does to acquire a woman. So forgive me if that's, that's actually a problem if you don't have that view, whether a marriage works, but it's supposed to be a kinyan of a man. So does he have to have specific intent? In other words, l'shem kiddushin, when he has bia? Or does living together create a marriage? Maybe that's a kind of specific intent. Those are some of the questions I was interested in. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to read a little bit in the beginning. First of all, we have these two psukim. I added these today because they're sort of running around all the time in our conversations. Al tichalel et bitcha l'haznota v'lo tizaneh haaretz umlei haaretz zima. So this is saying, don't sort of turn your daughter into a prostitute. And then it says, because the land will fill with zima, with the Talmud with zima, with I don't know how you translate zima, disgrace or filth. I don't know. The Talmud actually explains why, because if she's having relations with lots of different people, then there could be two brothers a brother and a sister that don't know their brother and sister that get married. They're actually brother and sister because they're from the same zona, or from, I don't know, somehow like that. Well, she should know who her children are, but I don't know. Something like that. That if everyone's having relations with everybody, we don't know, or the fathers could be the same. Two different prostitutes. Okay, so that's the zona. That seems to be something the father does. And then we have Lo tiye kadesha mibnot Yisrael v'lo yeh kadesh mibnei Yisrael. You can't have a kadesha or a kadesh. So there's two different terms, a zonah and a kadesha. Whether they're the same, maybe they're the same, maybe they're not. There is some people who want to say that a kadesha is like a holy prostitute having to do with the temple service. But I was reading a scholarly article that was saying that there's no proof for that existing at this time.
The fact that Yehuda thought Tamar was a kadesha and it was nowhere near a temple would also sort of
would also seem to imply that exactly that the word kadesha doesn't connect to holy prostitutes that may have existed in other cultures, but not in this time. Okay, so now let's get to this Gemara. So that's just telling you that there is such a thing as a prohibition of being a Kadesha, of having a Kadesha, and of letting your daughter be a Zonah. And then we have this Mishnah and Gittin.
Could you zoom in a bit?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for that. That's too much.
Thank you.
Now we should get to this interesting Gemara. Maybe Sarah, you want to read for us this Gemara?
Sure.
We'll start with the Mishnah here.
Okay, so here's a Mishnah. Hamagaresh et ishto vilina imo bepundaki Beit Shammai umrim ena tzricha hemenu get sheni vebeit Hillel umrim tzricha hemenu get sheni. Ematai bizvan shenit garsha min hanesuin umotim b'shenit garsha min ha'erusin she'ena tzricha hemenu get sheni mipnei she'en libo gaspa. Okay, so the Mishnah says someone who divorces their wife and then stays with her in some sort of inn. Beit Shammai says she doesn't need a second get. Beit Hillel says you do need a second get. And I had a question here about like what is the like actual sort of substance of the machloket, which is like, is it that he's essentially married her a second time by sleeping with her in front of supposedly Azim, I guess, like just because they know that they're staying there, or is it that like there's something wrong with the initial divorce? We like are.
Oh no, it's definitely not that there's anything wrong with the initial divorce. It's definitely like, in other words, it's definitely because they're restating their vows. they're performing a marriage at another time. But still, there's a couple factors.
You think that like the sleeping together doesn't affect Kiddushin, but also that like there's some like he must have not really understood what he was doing when he gave the get, because otherwise why would he be sleeping with her again? No, that was my line of thinking.
I understand. No, but I'm just saying the general idea is that he regretted he regrets
something.
We're assuming a couple of things, and that we're about to see. I didn't review the whole Gemara. It's actually not so long, but I didn't want to spend too much time on it. But there's actually a dispute about what exactly is the machloket here. In the interim, it says, here, read the next part here, Titania.
Titania, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, lo nichlaku Beit Shammai v'Beit Hillel, al shelo ra'ua shenivla, she'ena tzricha hemenu get sheni, al man nichlaku, al shera'ua shenivla, she'Beit Shammai umrim adam oseh bi'ilat to bi'ilat znud, v'Beit Hillel umrim ein adam oseh bi'ilat to bi'ilat znud.
Right. So let's dig into this here. This is saying if they didn't see shelo ra'u, so then we don't have witnesses. We right? Well, why? Well, maybe we do have witnesses. We have the people in the inn that know that they were together. But what does it mean shelo ra'u? Does it mean shelo ra'u? See, lo ra'u could mean lo ra'u at the act, the ma'aseh itself, or it could mean lo ra'u.
I thought when it says it's actually talking about the act itself.
I think you're right. Why, Exactly.
Yeah,
lo ra'u means we have.
They didn't see that she was like.
They didn't see the intercourse exactly itself happening, which we would hope that would be the case in all circumstances. But the point is, if they didn't see the shelo ra'u shenivla, in other words, the actual act, she'ena tzricha hemenu get sheni. Why not? Because they didn't see. But rather,
they need 2 sets of Adam,
in other words, we first need to have witnesses. We for sure need to have witnesses of the actual act. And then there's a machlok, even then there's a machlokas. Because just because he had relations with her and we saw it, doesn't mean that he was trying to marry her. Maybe it was znut. It was his wife, and his passions overcame him. And her passions overcame her. And they did this act in front of witnesses, but they weren't intending to get married. They were just doing it for znut. And Beit Hillel says, no, we're talking about people are Jewish people are tzaddikim. Ein adam osei bilato bilat znut. If he had relations with her, why he wouldn't do that just for znut. He would do that because he wanted to marry her. And that's the argument. The argument is, what is the intent? Or I say like this: what intent do we apply to a case where we don't have a clear intent? In other words, we have a stam bia. It's just a stam act. What intent do we apply to it?
It seems like it doesn't even matter if we don't even ask them what their intent was, right? There's an assumption about what the intent is.
Right.
Whatever.
We're going to make chazal. I even saw, we ignore what he says. We don't care. We're going to decide what his intent was. And Beit Hillel says, even if he tells us it was znut, we say, no, it wasn't znut. It was for remarriage. We're going to require a get from him if he wants to leave this woman.
So my question is that are they making a general statement as it relates to whether a man does belong snut, or they're talking specifically in this case, right?
Well, that's an excellent question, which we're going to address. But you're right. I mean, what is special about this case?
They already have this, as you were saying earlier, they already have this relationship. Maybe he regretted what he did, right? So in this case, that's where the machloket is, right? Do we say in this particular case that he regretted it, they just want to rekindle the passion and remarry her again? Or do we say that...
Or is this only... Okay, so we'll see this is a machloket between the Gaonim and the Rambam. We're going to see this is a machloket. The answer to that question is a machloket. Is this case specifically to... only in this circumstance where you're with a woman who, you have, I'll put it this way, you have a way of making this act a kosher act by saying it's for bia. But what about it, but is it only in this case? Or is it in every case? In every case like this? Or is it only dafka where it was a divorced woman where we can assume that he really wants to get married to her? In other words, what if I was with a panuya and a panui who have relations, and we have witnesses? Do we also apply this rule? Does Beit Hillel also say there? In Adam he could. Why not? He why should he be doing an isser? Let him do Let him do something as mutter.
Sorry. That I think we should see it in the context of the different cost of marriage from Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and I can't remember how much it is, but Beit Shammai makes marriage much more costly. I think it's one zuz, and Hillel says one puta. So in general, if you're going according to Beit Hillel, then in all cases, or in most cases, people could afford to be married in a different way than they could under a Beit Shammai system. And so Beilat Znut might be a different.
Well, the zuz and the I thought you were going to talk about ketubah, but the zuz and the pruta is only an initial payment. It's not. I don't understand.
That if somebody is very poor and requires a lot more thinking and premeditation to acquire the money for the initial payment, then it would be much harder to get married. And so having regular intercourse before that's achievable, if you can only get married with shtar or with kesef, might be.
No. Beit Shammai agrees that you could get married with Bila. He just is not. He's just saying you have to specifically say, "I'm doing this for kiddushin." If you don't specifically say that, then we don't attribute any intent to your actions.
I just think that people would be much more likely to have sex that is seen as znut if the cost of marriage is much higher to them.
Because you're assuming that, like, once they do sex for the purpose of marriage, that then they will be expected to pay the either puta or Zeus. That's what you're saying.
They wouldn't. I mean, they wouldn't.
No, they wouldn't, right? That the marriage is already consummated, and that's their contract.
But this actually, let me go on, because this opinion here is actually not the final opinion of the Gemara, and that's why I added this section here. Because go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I would say right now is that there's principles being enunciated in a specific case. And the surprising klal on one side is Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilatzinut. But it starts here. The question is, how far can it be expanded according to Beit Hill? But it starts here. In other words, we shouldn't already assume it's a universal principle.
Well, it's actually, regarding
even though
right.
It sounds like universal principle, but we only have evidence of it here right now. And one of the questions really will be is how far do we extend that? If that principle, if Beit Hill is correct, how far do we extend that principle?
That's exactly the question. Is this that's the problem that the Onim have? How specific is this case, and how general? How much can we generalize it? But actually, I brought in another Gemara that wasn't in the original source sheet. Well, skip to here, right here. I didn't give it even a number here. Talmud Bavli Masechet Yevamot Daf Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph. And I am not bringing you the whole story there, but it says like this: Rav of Rav Yosef, Ta'amri Travaihu, both of them say, time in debate Shammai, Lefisha Ein Adam say Bilato Bilatznu. So that's Beit Shammai. So actually, this principle, this idea of dividing the machloket here between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, resting on this principle of Ein Adam say Bilato Znud, is not such a well-founded way to divide the sugya, because actually Beit Shammai, according to Rabba and Rav Yosef, also holds Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilatznut. So the Gemara actually goes on and gives a different explanation. Umatnitin, we kind of reject this opinion, this whole opinion here, and we go on. Actually, Sarah, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Can you want to read the next part of our Gemara? We're just going to give a whole different explanation of why this is Bia, why this Bia counts as Kiddushin.
Where should I start?
From here, where it says Matnitin.
Okay, v'matnitin de okimna v'lo ra'u hashanivla v'may palgi ika adei yichud v'leika adei Bia. Beit Shammai savri lo amrin hein hein adei yichud hein hein adei Bia. Beit Shammai savar amrinan hein hein adei yichud hein hein adei Bia. V'modim benit garsha min ha'erusin she'ena tzricha yemenu get she'eni dekevan she'en libo gaspa lo amrinan hein hein adei Bia.
Right, okay. So what is the crux of the argument now? In other words, whether
or not we assume that two people who were alone together had sex.
No. That's a jump. That's a jump further than I was going to go, but you could be right. I would just say more simply, whether having witnesses of yichud is considered also, that is that equivalent to having witnesses of the actual act. Okay, and you're saying, well, and what you said is that maybe the underlying, what Yavni said is maybe the underlying reason why we would say that. But, because if people have yichud, we're going to assume that they had, marital relations, and then, anan sahade.
Well, I think it relates to specific circumstances, right? Under a certain set of circumstances, you say hamadi yichud, hamadi bia, right? So let's say, for example, a couple just got married. If you have one set of edim that's them being a yichud, you assume that they're also a bia, right? The question in this case is whether they're considered as a couple that are married, and whether you could give those edim those two those.
Yeah, I like what you're saying. In other words, let's say it like this. Let me repeat what you're saying. What you're basically saying is like this: that hen a bia. In other words, those, let's be translated. Those who are the witnesses of the yichud are also considered to be witnesses of the bia. Beit Shammai and Hillel both agree that that's a principle that we have. They only argue on in how often we apply it, in what circumstances we apply it. And for example, they both agree that we don't apply it in the second part here when it's mina erusin, when they never had consummated the marriage. They had maybe did kesef kiddushin, but they had never actually lived together. So then we're going to assume that if a panui and a panui, or not panui exactly, but an arusa and an arusator have yichud together, even with witnesses, we're not assuming that they did anything. We can't say anan sahadi. We can't say we testify just because we know there was yichud that there must have been, because liba lo gasba. In other words, he would be embarrassed to do that with her without being married, without having, gone through the chuppah.
But it's an important point because the Gemara is not claiming that men have no restraints.
Right, exactly. Some people might say, well, a man and a woman are together in a room, then we know what they're doing.
One's familiar.
But when one's familiar, then we know what they're doing. But on that, Beit Shammai says, no, even if they're familiar, we don't say. I mean, I don't know if there are any case where he says hen ede yichud hen ede ibia, whether Beit Shammai ever holds like that. It's not that important because Beit Hillel holds like that. But so within Beit Hillel, we see that he applies it sometimes, and he doesn't always apply it.
This could be read back into the idea that even Beit Shammai agrees that Ein Adam Oseh Beila Tel Bilat Znut. It's just we can assume in certain cases there's no bias happening at all.
Oh yeah. Excellent point, Joel. Tremendous contribution. Yeah. According to this second reading, it might be that everybody agrees that and that's why I brought this other Gemara here. Everybody agrees that Ein Adam Oseh Biato Bilat Znut, at least in this circumstance. Remember, if he's at a prostitute's house, maybe he does. But in this circumstance, everybody agrees that Ein Adam Oseh Biato Bilat Znut, and therefore the machlokas is only on this question of whether they have witnesses to the act.
Can I just add something tangential that may be relevant or not? I think I've looked at this before in a different context. And in the Tosefta and the Yerushalmi, when they talk about Eidim, they talk about Eidim that are affirming the kashrut of the interaction between the couple. Whereas the Mishnah and the Bavli, I think in general, are saying the Eidim exist in order to have a suspicious regard with what the Yichud has meant. So in the parallel Tosefta, the Eidim are coming to legitimize, to reaffirm the fact that the Gerushim are still valid, which is the whole opposite position. And I think
to reaffirm that the what? That the Gerushin are still valid?
Right, that the get is still valid, because when the Tosefta talks about the Eidim, it talks about the Eidim as being Eidim that show that there is no sexual act that has invalidated the get. Whereas here, the presumption is one that the Eidim are ones of suspicion of the interaction between the husband and wife. So it's the opposite perspective on what is the purpose of Eidim in this situation.
In other words, it's like the couple has gone to the Beit Din in the faraway town to get their get, and now they're on their way, and they brought with them witnesses, and their witnesses are going to be chaperones now to make sure that nothing happens because on the way home, because they really want to get divorced. So the witnesses are there to say, yes, we didn't restart this marriage.
And then there are a couple of witnesses that are invalidated because of their personal connections to the couple, who wouldn't be able to testify to the validity of their relationship, the kashrut of their non-sexual interaction during this time. It's a very different kind of ideological.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. All right, let me just go on. This Rashi here, I don't know how important it is, but this part I like this. Kol kama de lo amar hareini boel l'shem kiddushin lo amrin l'shem kiddushin baal. In other words, the default is that it's znut. That's what it means. Beit Shammai that oseda. In other words, he could of course say that he's doing it for kiddushin. Okay, that's obvious.
I read this Rashi a bit differently. I read it specifically within that context, right? That when someone already divorced his wife, if he has a relationship with her again, it only works as kiddushin is to be very specific about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wouldn't say the default is en adam oseh bilato bilat znut. No, the default is whatever it is. But in this particular case, it only becomes a wedding again if he's very specific about it. The same way you have to be very specific about the divorce procedure, you also have to be very specific about getting married to her again.
But we're talking about Beit Shammai, who holds that it is znut.
Right, in this specific case. And that makes sense, right?
Well, if it's snut in this case, then it'll be snut in every case. This is the case.
No, it's snut just in this case because he already divorced his wife. Maybe he doesn't want to get back with her again. It says snut in this specific case, and that would make sense with the Gemara that you brought in Yevamot.
Okay, all right. It's not. The truth is not really that important, but because I think I'm trying to prove that Beit Shammai also agrees to this principle. Everybody agrees that in general, a person won't do that. And we just don't know how much to apply it. All right, let's go on to the Rosh. I brought this Rosh here because he's sort of, he's a Perush of the Gemara here. Maybe Josh, you want to read?
Yeah, Rosh. מתניתין כשלא ראוה כשנבהלה ודאיקה עדי ייחוד וליקה עדי ביאה. Okay, so you saying what the Gemara said? In this case, פליגי בית שמאי ובית הלל, בית שמאי סברי לא אמרינן הן עדי ייחוד הן עדי ביאה.
And he's going like the summary, the final psak of the Gemara is, like we said, she lo ra'u k'shenivala.
Right. There's witnesses there, and that is asking what those witnesses accomplish.
Right. They're witnesses of Yichud. And then Pligi Beit Shammai Beit Hillel.
I also have a question on this. But,
yeah, go ahead.
Just is behind this the idea that a din for some kind of kiddushin needs to know what they're witnesses for in order to create kiddushin? Right.
You're saying if I say you're witnesses to Yichud, but you're not witnesses to Biyah.
Right.
I don't think so. I think because there's no such concept of, there's no such concept.
If someone gives a ring and says, there's two witnesses who have never seen a Jewish wedding in their life. All they know is the ring was given. Is that enough?
Sure.
I mean,
they're witnesses of the fact. They're witnesses of the fact. I mean, they have to be kosher Jews, whatever, but they're witnesses of the fact. They're witnesses like a murder.
This is considered universal now. Right? Anybody who sees a movie knows what it is. Anybody who's heard about it. Everyone's heard about it. In other words, there's no case in which they heard about it.
No, but they don't have to know. I don't think they. Well, I mean, I could extend the question. Do they have to know that a wedding is going on? Maybe not. As long as they know that I gave this money to this woman, and they can testify in court, yes, he gave a gold ring to that woman, and they both say, in other words, they have to say, and he said, you're saying he also has to say, because what if they don't? That's an interesting question.
So here
he also has to be given L'Shem Kiddushin.
It's considered universal knowledge. Everyone knows.
No, but I'm asking you, is that required?
But it is. Okay, I'll get off.
You're right.
In addition to being witnesses of the fact, we also have an assumption, a chazaka, that fact of yichud, we can assume that there's biyah. So right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what Eidei Yichud are. They're Eidei Biyah. That's what we're saying. I mean, I don't think nowadays in modern weddings anybody does that at a HaEzer Yichud, but that's the concept. I think the Greeks used to do that. Well, let's go on. Oh, Sarah, you want to say something?
Well, I have sort of way of reformulating this question, which might be a little less require less of a counterfactual, which is you might have someone who's a witness who is a kosher witness, seems like they basically know what's going on, but don't know, for example, that the woman has to actually apparently willingly actually accept the thing. So then, right, that's a more specific detail that you might need to know about what you're supposed to be witnessing that somebody might not know. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the question is, do they need to know that in order to be doing the job?
Right. I mean, do you have, right. you have to explain that he is acquiring this woman in marriage through an act of you have to explain to him what the deep concept of kiddushin is, because you don't want to say it's not really Kenyan in a normal sense. He doesn't own her.
But they have to testify that she
willingly
if somebody said no, he threw the ring at her and she ran away, then
right,
that testimony would not lead you to think, oh yes, that was real, that was kosher kiddushin and everything's fine now, right? That would lead you to say that didn't
no. But what if
work.
the witnesses came and said, oh, we didn't realize it was a wedding, we did see that he gave her the ring and she happily took it, but we didn't know, we just thought he gave it to her as a present.
Okay, I'm moded to you on that. It's just used to be a TV detective show. Just the facts, ma'am. What's the facts, right? So just the facts, and they say the facts, and they do as little as possible interpretation. Except that there's always some cognitive understanding. Well, okay, just
yeah.
that.
I mean,
and
I wasn't thinking about this question when I was
overinterpret. Says, well, he did throw a ring, and she wasn't.
Wait, I lost you there, Rabbi Landis.
Of Adam. It's more of the din of Adam. We don't need, we weren't far enough. You got
yeah, okay, fine. Let's go on.
I would slightly disagree, actually. From a legal perspective, there have to be witness to specific interaction between the man and the woman, and it has to know what it is for. Or else they're not Adam to actual kiddushin, they Adam to some random exchange.
Well, maybe not. I mean, in a murder trial, if I say I saw him put a knife into her, I didn't know that would kill people. I didn't know that would. I thought he was, just scratching his chest.
But that would make the difference between manslaughter and murder, right? So same thing here, right? Knowing the
witness just has to be a witness to the fact. He just witnesses. I saw the knife go into him. I have no idea why that happened or anything about it, but I did see it happen.
Right, so but it's the same thing here, right? It has to be L'Shem Kiddushim in order for it to be a valid wedding. They have to have an intent in order for it to be murder. Kind of the same concept here, right? So if you see someone just sticking a knife into someone else's throat, you don't know whether there's an intent or not.
But the witness doesn't have to be able to determine,
what's in the mind of, exactly, what's in the mind of the Chatan is what's in the mind of the Chatan.
But that's the thing, a wedding has to have that intent with it in order to be a valid wedding.
The intent is not
and it has to be. No, but it has to be witnessed in order for the wedding to be correct.
Because you have to.
So, because you basically asked the Chatan, right? Did you buy in front of the Edom? Did you buy this with your own money for this specific purpose? And once
you don't say to them, but you don't say to them, no, you don't say to them, do you understand that a wedding is taking place now? You don't say to them, do you understand that this act of maybe you do. By giving him this ring, he is acquiring her as a wife.
But yeah, because Aiden to the wedding also has to be Aiden to the
signature. Ruben, you convinced me that I was totally wrong before. Thank you. Because you're going too far. The witnesses don't determine that. They just determine they just say what they saw and what they heard. And then we the judges, we determine whether or not that he has intent.
Exactly.
So thank you.
So yeah, so they don't have to know, right? They have to, okay, what they heard is a good additional point. Because that they have to hear Harei Atmi Kodeshli or something similar. Okay, so let me just read the beginning of this Rosh because I see that whatever reason I'm gonna slow them down. Ubeit Shammai Savri lo amrinan hen ede yichud hen ede bia. Ubeit Hillel Savri amrinan hen ede yichud hen ede bia. That's just what we said. That's the machloket. Umodim be'im nitgar shavachule. Lo amrinan hen. Okay, so that's the chule. But lo amrinan hen ede yichud hen ede bia de ein libo gasba. Aval im ra'u shenivala. But if they actually saw the act, bein arusa bein nesua, then tzricha mimenu get. Because the only point of the arusa not working is because we can't assume that he even did the act at all. But if we saw the act, then we don't need to assume anything. And we will go with our klal, ein adam, sigam get, the ein adam osei bilato bilat ubal Hashem kedushin, even if it was just as arusa. So if we saw the act, we're always going to apply this rule of ein adam osei bilato bilat. The only question is how much we can assume about yichud leading to bia. All right, let me go on. Umistaber dafka begirushin min harusin kevan shekvar hayta arusa omer. And here's where we're talking about the specifics of this case. Omer nitchartu ala girushin. We say that since it was just after a divorce, and now they're in yichud together, usually people who have divorce don't want to have yichud together, and they did. So obviously nitchartu, they changed their mind. Ala girushin v'chazru. Ubal Hashem Kedushin. So that's specific to this case. Avalim ra'u edim shebal isha da'alma. So now he's going the other way. What about where we have the actual act? We don't have a machlokus about hen edai or not. We have the actual act being witnessed. But it's a stam, it's a woman da'alma, a general woman, a woman that's not having a history with this man. Ein chosheshin l'kiddushin. Then we don't apply the rule of ein adam osei bilato bilat znut. It's not kiddushin. Daha Rav HaEzer panuya ba'al panuya asa zona. This is a different Gemara. Asa zona v'lo amrinan sheba'al l'shem kiddushin. We don't say that was a for the purpose of marriage. We don't say that. So you see here that the Rosh is restricting it to this case, but not a general case, not any penuya. Is that right? Is that only this person that you have a history with? V'lo pligi ben baal b'fnei edim u'ben baal shelo b'fnei edim. That they don't argue whether it was when it was in front of 80 or not in front of 80. V'ken nosei adam anusat aviv u'mifetat aviv. A man can marry a person that his father raped or seduced because that wasn't a marriage. So it's not marrying his father's wife. V'lo chayshinan shem ha'ba'al Hashem kiddushin. V'havya eshit aviv. Ken ketav Rambam. So the Rosh is just proving here that don't take this too far. It doesn't apply to Tanuya. It only applies to this case where we have this. Now, it's not just that Liba Gaspa that they did the act. We have a reason to think that he wanted to do Kiddushin here. We have some reason to think. In this case, Nitchartu. They changed their mind about the divorce. It happens, actually. People get divorced and they realize they don't want to be apart.
But right. So well said, and so well said by the Rush, because there's a host of problems if we apply ein adam oseh bilato bilat zenut
across the board.
For the ponui, you're going to have mamzerim all over the place.
Oh,
You're going to have marriages all over the place, and possibility of mamzerim and all that. Therefore, it's a very, it's a very wonderful principle that people have intention and you want to have kiddushin, but you have to think of the context, and you have to think about the outcome. And the outcome in the case of Ponuya and Ponuya will be incredibly difficult if we assume that there's
we would create an untenable situation. You
make them, everyone. We're going to have a lot of problems afterwards.
But that's not his approach.
Does that make sense?
That is 100% true. We'd have a terrible outcome. But he also he's not really saying that. All he's saying is that we have proofs that it's not the case, because we have this statement of Rav Elazar, and we know the
halacha. He
halacha.
says the right.
No, that's a halacha.
Okay.
We have these halachas that we know you're allowed to marry your. Right. We know the halacha is you're allowed to marry the woman your father seduced, and pay, and he paid her the money that he had to pay, and now she's a penuya, but she's not considered married to him. And why not? If we would say bilato bilat, so the father, the mifutah, the one that he had relations with, should be his wife. A kiddushin. She agreed.
He didn't have the covenant.
Like it's just complicated because like there has to be a reciprocity in the marriage process, right?
What'd you say?
There has to be some kind of reciprocity in the marriage process, even throughout like kiddush bia. There has to be
what do you mean by reciprocity?
Well, she has to accept it, right? That's the whole premise of marriage. He offers something, she accepts it back. So
mifutet aviv is she's seduced. Seduced means she agreed.
Well, no, there is the concept of rape
rape.
Rape would be a different story.
Rape is maybe less of a proof, but yeah.
No, seduction is not agreement. Why do you say seduction? Separate arguments today.
I thought
it's not agreement. That's why they're not married. I mean, there is nothing chashash of it. Seduction is in the same category as rape. I mean,
I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think so. I think she agrees. She agrees under duress, but he bought her chocolates and he tricked her.
Seduction could be a bit different. I agree with Rav Nachum.
The point is, I think the Rosh's point is that it was with agreement, but it wasn't the Shem Kiddushin. And he's proving from that you need to be the Shem Kiddushin.
Right, but the Rosh takes a very extreme stance. He said that any penuya that has sex with the panui is nikrazona. What about if she thought she was doing L'Shem Kiddushin? Why don't we take that in consideration?
Where do you see that? Did we see that he calls her a zona?
Yeah, sorry. He's saying clearly. He says that any case that is not like
that's
marriage, she gets like a social status of a zona.
No. He is not. He is quoting Rav Elazar. Rav Elazar would not say that she is a zona if it weren't that everybody agrees that she's not married. But he doesn't necessarily agree with Rav Elazar. He's not paskening Rav Elazar. He's just bringing that as a proof that it's not a marriage. Because the halacha is not like Rav Elazar. But the fact that he says it shows that kiddushin did not take place. Because if that would have taken place, if we would have applied the klal across the board of and everything's the same kiddushin, then why would he say she's a zone? Obviously, we don't apply it, but there may be other reasons why we don't call it a zone.
There's a machloket like in Kiddushim. I don't remember if it's in Gittin or Kiddushim was to whether nowadays you could actually have bia. You could have Kiddushim with bia, right? It's a machloket in the Gemara itself. Maybe Rav Elazar is of the opinion that it doesn't work like that.
It's not a machloket. It's a Rav Mangin Mand Mikadesh bia. We'll see that. It's one of my sources. There's a rabbinic prohibition, but it's not. Everybody agrees that bia works. Deraisa. Okay, let's now. I want to contrast this with this other rosh because look at this rosh. Haba al shifchato vadai shifra. So this is talking about a person who has a shifcha and he has relations with her. Vadai shifra mi'ikara. He must have first released her from her servitude if he had relations with her. Velo mafliginan bein ba'aleh haderech nisuin ubein ba'aleh haderech znut. V'harambam b'berech lo nira lo divrei gaonim ve'ein divrav nirin. So we're going to see the Rambam in a minute, but what did I want to get from here? We just said that you do when you have relations with somebody. A man has relations with a woman, he could be znut. But yet, why not by a shifcha say it's also znut? Why does he say, Habal shifchato vadai shifra meikara? Why does he say for sure he released her so that he shouldn't be doing, in other words, that he shouldn't be doing, and then he says, and then and then when he did have a relationship with her, he was marrying her. He released the Shifcha Kanani, she became Jewish, and then he has bia with her, and he marries her. We're assuming that when all we know, in fact, is that he had relations with the Shifcha. We're going to assume this whole story. Oh, he must have freed her, and then he had relations to marry her because Ein Adam Oseh Bilat Bilat Znut, or for another reason. But we have this question. The Rosh sort of contradicts himself because on the one hand he said before that people have Bilat Znut by a Penuya. It's not l'shem kiddushin. Why is it by a shifcha shem kiddushin? So we'll see. Anyone want to offer what maybe they saw already? Anyone want to offer an explanation for the Rosh? Why by
is very different.
I don't see how necessarily shichol means also kiddushin. Like, I mean, I think it's clear that this act definitely is giving her a status that is no longer of a shifcha. But because he says whatever his intention was, it's not clear to me that from there we have to force him to marry her, at least from this part of the answer. Is that clear to somebody else?
In other words, maybe we're assuming that he is mishachrer ota, but not marrying her. And he is doing znut. So why did he mishachrer ota? So that he shouldn't do the avera of sleeping with the shifcha. That's also an avera.
I think we might have to go back to context, right? I mean, like when it's someone that's so close to you and that's already lives in your house, which means like you're not going to do it so publicly that you're going to show everyone you're doing znut. If you're living in such close quarter with a woman and you're having sexual relationship with her, we can assume that you did it properly, especially if you do it in a public eye type of thing.
That's very interesting point.
I would say the shifcha, as we say, I know is a shifcha kananis. He still is usher to her, but they are in a relationship. Okay, I think that the halachic thinking is to raise her status. He's meshachrer ota, and why is he meshachrer ota? He's meshachrer ota not to go into, to go on the street or to be. He's meshachrer ota so that she will be in a higher relationship than even shivcha, which is a marriage. He's meshachrer. We also have to say, the shichrur of a shivcha or a shivcha kananis or of an eved kananis is constitutes the completion of the gerus. So once he's meshachrer her, she's already Jewish. Ein adam oseh bilata bilat zenus. She's Jewish at this moment because she already had as a shifcha kananis, she was already partially Jewish or almost Jewish or whatever. Now she's Jewish. Ein adam oseh bilata bilat zenus. And the madrega, and I think the Chazal had an interest in raising the madrega of people, but it fits in with the cloud that's not being a biatzanut, as opposed to the option. They don't want an option that it's that Dafka, he's going to make a decision now that it's a biatzanut. He has to be shachrer in order to live with her. And it's not just to escape the Isur, which was suggested, but it's also to do it in a proper way.
Didn't we just in general reject the Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilatzanut? Except for the specific case of the...
Well, so that's the expansion here. The Rosh is expanding it to at least one more case. First, we're limiting it, and we're saying it doesn't apply to a regular Penuya. And here's a case where it does apply to the Shifcha. So it applies to a Gerush after they're coming back from the Gerushin, and also to a Shifcha. But I forget whose comment it was, but it maybe that is not the best proof from the Rosh, but that was the best I could find. It took me a while to find all these sources, and there may be a better source in the Rush for that opinion.
Right. This is a very good expansion.
Yeah,
it's moving in the right direction.
But I like what Reuben said, that it's the context
that you are off married to the Baal than being the shifcha of the Baal or being thrown on the street without any resources. This is pasha to them.
Here, let's see.
I disagree with it, but it's pasha to them.
Gary, maybe you want to read the Rambam for us. The Rambam, let's see the Rambam's opinion. So we have now. Well, whose opinions have we seen? We've seen the Rosh and the Rambam. That's all. So, I mean, the Rosh and now the Rambam. So go ahead. And this, we're going to see, the Rambam is going to teach us about another opinion, which is the Gaonim. And anybody who's studied the history of the Rambam knows that the Rambam actually came into a lot of conflict with the Gaonim of Bavel. They didn't like him very much. They felt that he was usurping their authority. And he wrote tshuva to people that they didn't agree with. They thought he was wrong, and he thought they were wrong. So here's actually an example in the Mishnah Torah, a nice example where you see him, I don't know, provoking, or not intentionally. I don't mean to say intentionally, but here's one of, if the Gaonim would
dismissing.
If the Gaonim would want to have an example of where they're annoyed with the Rambam, here would be an example. So go ahead, Gary. Gersha, we don't hear you.
His mic doesn't work.
Oh, your mic is not working. Okay, so we'll. So Josh, why don't you read? Oh, your mic is also not working. At least not very well. Who else? Somebody wants to read? I don't see everybody here.
I'll read.
You'll read? No, you're not allowed to read.
You?
You're not allowed to read.
Okay.
Reuven, what about Reuven?
I can give it a shot. Does my mic work? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Too well.
הורו מקצת הגאונים שכל אישה שתיבעל בפני עדים צריכה גט. וואי חזקה שאין אדם עושה בירתו ברצנות. והגדילו והוסיפו בדבר זה.
Wait, let's stop for a second. Just let's everybody take a deep breath there. The Gaonim say this amazing opinion. You know, every case, call Isha Shetival Bifnei Edim Tzricha Menu Get. And Edim could also be Ede Yichud, if we have reason to believe that that's what they were doing there.
Right.
So this is this amazing opinion that's saying, very as Rabbi Landis would say, it's would cause a lot of mamzerim, a lot of problems. But
it's a total expansion of a very nice principle.
Right, it's a very nice principle, but it's an over expansion of it. So, and then they're gonna continue on.
By the way, this is Rav Nachum going with a big A.
Okay, thank you.
והגדילו והוסיפו בדבר זה שעלה על דעתם עד שהורו שמי שיש לו בן משפחתו חושש אם לו ולא תתשבע מאשתו שמה שחרר שפחתו ואחר כך בעליה.
Wait a second. So here he argues on the Rush, right? At least the way I explained the Rush. Well, explain what he just said.
Well, they just added to it. שעלה דעתם עד שהורו, like, בדבר זה שעלה דעתם, עד שהורו שמי שיש לו בן משפחתו, they added that whoever has a son from the שפחה, חושש אם לו, we חושש that his בילה would be tzniut.
And therefore the son is his real son. We're assuming that he freed the woman and the son is a Jewish child. And, well, it doesn't have to be through marriage, but as a Jewish child. Velotit yabem, and she shouldn't have to do yibum the wife, his wife, Ishto, shouldn't have to Yibum because he has a son from his Shifcha. And the Shifcha, he obviously freed, like the Rosh said. And the Rambam is saying, this is a expansion that is wrong.
Should I continue?
Yeah.
ויש מי שהורה שוודאי שחררה שאין אדם עושה בלעתו בלעצמות. And there's some people that add even further that obviously he liberated her, freed her because שאין אדם עושה בלעתו בלעצמות. It's all across the board rule that a man doesn't do בלעתו בלעצמות. וכל הדברים האלה רחוקים הם בעינם מאוד מדרכי ההוראה. So the Rambam said that those ideas from the Geonim are totally off.
Now wait a second. I want to jump on those words. Rechokim hem beinayim ad ma'od midarkei hora'ah. Here the Rambam is telling us a little bit something about darkei hora'ah. What is darkei hora'ah? The way of being a teacher, the way of teaching halakha. He's saying, and I think it's exactly what Rav Landis was saying. They're expanding in a way that they are not thinking about the consequences of the law. And they're, first of all, and secondly, it's also not required because the Gemara seems to be about a specific case. So they're failing in two ways, really, to be proper teachers of halakha.
So according to Rambam, שלא אמרו חכמים חזקה זו אלא באשתו שגירשה בלבד, או במקדש על תנאי, ובעל סתם, שהרי אשתו היא ובאשתו היא, שחזקתו שאינו עושה בלעתו בלעצמות, עד שפרש שהיא בלעצמות, או יפרש שעל תנאי ובועל. Said that when we said an adam עושה בלעתו בלעצמות, it is very specific cases, such as the case of a gerusha, or when it's his wife, or when he's mekadesh al tnai. And in these cases, we said that an adam עושה בלעתו בלעצמות until he says otherwise.
Right.
He
also brought in another case of you marry on Tanai. If you marry on Tanai, but then you consummate the marriage, even if the Tanai has not been fulfilled, then obviously you have, you've given up on the Tanai. So that would also be a case where you consider it that it's up to you to decide. You have this Tanai and you're mevatel the Tanai. Aval.
So the Rambam seems to be going like Rabbi Elazar. That
it does seem that way. We're going to get it. This is going to be our next topic, which is what exactly is the definition of a zonah and what are the meanings here. But it sounds like he's using the word zonah, and he's saying if she's having relations with somebody who's a penuya, comes on a penuya, that's a zonah, and we assume that it's for znut. Unless
right? So you have to be very specific. In certain cases, like the how do you call it? Like the context is enough for you to understand that it's not bila to bila snut. In any other cases, you have to make it clear.
Right.
ואין צריך לומר בשפחה או כותית שאינה בקידושים שאין חוששים להם כלל. והרי הבן מהן בחזקת כותי ועבד עד שהתוודע בוודאי שנתחרה עמו או נתגיירה. So basically saying in those cases of kutit or shivcha, we don't even assume that he freed her first. And the son is bechazkat kutit veved ad shehitvada bevadai shenichara imo.
And we're assuming he's doing an isser. We're going to assume that he's doing an isser. If he's having relations with a goy or a shivcha, we're assuming, we're not going to say he's or not. And this actually fits to something else, another interesting halacha of the Rambam, which I didn't bring, which is a very interesting halacha. He says, dan lachav schut. He talks about dan lachav schut. And he says, you should, if he's a tzaddik, you should mefaresh all of his actions as being actions, good actions, kosher actions, dan lachav schut. But if he's a rasha, then even his good actions you should explain as being for bad purposes. So he doesn't say you always dan lachav schut, only for a person who you have, in other words, only for a person who you generally know about him that he's a tzaddik. Well, So the Rambam is saying something similar here. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's similar. He's saying, if you don't kid yourself. You see he's having relations with a shifcha or a goy, for sure, you're not going to assume that he's did all these things to make it a kosher act. And so too,
even though it's a theoretical possibility. You're right. I mean, there's a difference between making and arguing and then poskening. And just what you said. I mean, I'm agreeing with what you said. And therefore, hora'ah means, as you said, don't kid yourself.
Right. So,
I think it's a really interesting contrast between middle-aged like Ashkenaz piety versus like Sephardic realism, right? It's like they see it as every Israel is bechazkat kashrut, and the Rambam is like, yeah, don't kid yourself. That's the way the world works. And if you have sex with a goy, like chances are that you haven't been married.
I don't know if you're right, because the Gaonim are probably in Bavel, so they're also, and they're the opposite opinion. So they're also not realistic.
On the point of realism, I think that the competing ideology that in Islam there's something called the temporary marriage that was definitely in effect at this time, that people could make the Tanai that they would only be married for 24 hours or a duration of 3 days. So that what they were doing was not znut, but it was clearly a legal fiction that was covering znut to make it okay for the women in Islam. But the children that derive from such a marriage would have to be maintained by their supposed father. So maybe part of this is polemical for the Rambam.
Right.
In other words, the Gaonim fit into that.
That's really important. Yeah.
The Gaonim are living in a well, so is the Rambam, but the Gaonim and the Rambam are living in a Muslim world where they were going to be aware of these things. Yeah, I mean, we could, of course, explain the Gaonim and say, well, yeah, he's doing it for marriage, but he's also divorcing her, the next day. So then there's no mamzer. You can marry and divorce. Okay, let's take a break for 5 minutes, and then we'll look at the Ravid.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sure. Ravad.
Sure, thank you. And I welcome you to correct me. Okay. V'harei haben mihen b'chazakat goy v'eved ad sheyodua b'vadai shenitgera imo o nishtachra. So the child of the situation is considered like a goy or an eved unless it's known for sure that the mother, I can say, converted.
Yeah, that's all a quote. I put that in quotation. I added those quotes just so you see that that's the quotation from the Rambam.
Great. Okay.
I think people usually say Aleph is like Avraham Omer or Ani Avraham. I don't know. It's because it's Avraham is his name. Avraham Ibn Daud. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Sorry, I made notes on your previous source sheet, and marking it up, which is why I'm working from that version. Okay. Yeah. Avraham Omer, Begoya Vadai, Kenhu, Barav, Shahare, Ein Beado, Legira, Aval, Shifchato, Sheyesh Beado, Shcharara, Divrahem, Kruvim.
So that's so he's saying he's giving a reason. He's saying he's first of all he's agreeing with the Rosh that by a shifcha you could, and he's also giving a reason because biyado, like you can't just convert a woman in a minute. You have to have a base din of 3 people, but a slave you could free her. That's your prerogative. So if it's in his, in other words, where there is a possibility, he's capable of causing this to be a kosher event. We'll assume he did cause it to be a kosher event. But he doesn't fully accept it. He says, Divrehem krovim. In other words, he's not repulsed by their ideas. They're krovim, they're reasonable. I'm not saying he's agreeing. They're reasonable.
So we're saying we give the benefit of the doubt when it's reasonable to do so?
No. I'm saying Divrehem is the words of the Gaonim.
The words of the Goanim are reasonable that we give. Giving the reason.
In the case of a slave woman who it was in his hands to free her, and I'm sort of adding, and then since he could have done it, so we'll assume he did. We'll assume he did do it.
It's amazing that we're willing to make that assumption here, but there's so many other assumptions we don't make.
Right. Well, here he's about to explain the reason again.
Yeah. Dolo shavik hayetera va'achil isura. Ela, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait. Ela im ken.
Ela im ken hu chazak bepritzut arayot. V'chen Beit Yisrael.
Wait, so translate that.
I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's
the lo shaviketera. He's not going to grab. He's not going to release.
He's not going to grab an isur when it's.
No, he's not going to release an isur. He's not going to get rid of, throw away a heter, and eat an isur. If he has a heter in his hand, he's not going to drop it and take an isur. So he has a way of doing it, but in a mutter way. Let's assume he does do it in a mutter way. Elim Kain, and then unless he's a person who we know about him that he's a gigolo, or if he's huchzach b'pritzut arayot, we know that he's sleeping with everything that walks. Then we're not going to make these assumptions about him being doing everything in a kosher way.
So we're looking at his character.
Exactly. So that's the key point. Actually, that I wanted you to get from the Ravid, that it depends on the character of the individual. That when his character is good, is a frum Jew, he goes to shul all the time and he's learning Torah, so that we can assume that he did his actions in a mutter way. If he's not, then we can assume that he didn't, that these are all just znut. So it's basically saying, be real, Understand who you're dealing with.
They're fine-tuning the principle when it's used.
Yes, Sarah.
It seems like the standard of the character analysis doesn't have to be like, he's from and he does everything he's supposed to. It just has to be, he's like, we don't have a chazaka that he's terrible in this specific area. Which is like a really low bar, actually.
You're right. 100% I agree with you. I said it in a certain way, but to paint a picture, I'm trying to be, an impressionistic picture there. But yeah, it could be anybody as well. You could argue. I think that certain people would argue that today the world is full of the priesthood. People, right,
maybe now everybody is like.
Is a poritz. Everybody. American society is completely, people sleep with many people before they get married, and they're not. That would be called priesthood, wouldn't it?
It also just seems like, I don't know, like this is maybe like depending on what your assumptions of the social situation are. Like this is evidence of pursuit in a certain way, or at least evidence of like not doing things the way that their tradition wants you to do them, even if like, well, we're not going to go so far as to say that you did all of these other things. Like, you're still doing kiddushin by bia, which you're not supposed to do. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't follow you.
In other words, it seems like just being in this situation at all is already evidence that he is.
You're saying even right. You're not supposed to get married with bia.
You're not supposed to get married with bia. You're not supposed to do that. We have like a general rabbinic like tradition that's not what we do.
You don't expect the guy
who doesn't work, but like that's not what you're supposed to do. That's pritzut. That's what it is.
It's a good. You actually, if you think about it, what you're saying is actually
that's a prum statement. Because it's frummer than them. It's
like frummer than them, right? Maybe it's too from, right? But like, it does seem like, I don't know. You could have a reading.
We should finish the last two lines. It addresses that.
I think that our society has changed so much. I think that in his day, really this didn't happen very much. And so, I mean, you'd have to be, there's this guy, you're right, it's a low bar. That's the way he's thinking of it. This guy, if he's really a Russia and really terrible person, then we're not going to sue this. But basically for everybody who maybe they screwed up and they did the wrong thing and they shouldn't have done this bia, but we're going to say, okay, now you're married.
Did you do the last two lines of the Rav? He seems to respond to it.
Okay, so let's read that. I put them in bold, so I must have thought they're important. So So go ahead. So who was reading? Amasha? Ilana?
Ilana.
I was going to say, it sounds to me like a man is allowed to do this once, but not repeatedly. V'chein bat Yisrael shetiv'al be'edim im lo hayu chidushim b'pritzut harayot. Chashudim, thank you. B'pritzut harayot. Ha'amad b'nei Yisrael u'vanot Yisrael al chazaktan u'v'chazakat kshirot hen. Shelo yitpartzu bifnei edim leznut v'yivrei hagaonim zal kaimanhem. Meaning, we trust the kedusha of the sons and daughters of Israel to not do such things.
Right. It is like Sarah was saying. It's
they're
low
more
bar.
positive than you guys are.
Right.
Right.
In other words, this is actually a concept in HaEzer v'Heter that we talk about. In other words, we have a hazaka that Bnei Yisrael are kosher, are not going to do averos, unless, especially such a terrible avera, in front of witnesses, right? They're going to have relations, because that's the only way to really be marriage, or in front of witnesses, or, maybe heder yichud, maybe eight yichud at least, but some kind of witnesses, and they're going to do pritzut. So it must be, we're going to assume that they're kosher Jews, and therefore they're getting married. That's the assumption. Unless we have some reason to uproot our hazaka. We have a hazaka. You can't just uproot a hazaka. You can only uproot it if you have a reason to uproot it. So only if they're hashudim b'pritzut. Only if these people are known to be swingers.
Well, I mean, we have a contrary chazaka when it comes to arayot, right? It says ena putrupus la arayot, and that's another chazaka. So whenever it gets to sexual matters, I can automatically counterbalance it. I don't think Israel is bechazkat kashrut when it's regarding this kind of subject.
Ena putrupus la arayot is another concept you bring in. It's a good question how exactly it interleaves, but the Rav holds that it does. He holds that that there is a kashrut that means that when such an event happens in front of witnesses, we're going to assume that that they did it in a mutter way. So let's summarize here.
So it's kind of a presumption of innocence in a way.
Yeah.
Did I miss it? When did it become? When did it become in front of? When did our case become in front of witnesses?
Well, that's the only way it would be marriage. We'd have to have some
wasn't
kind
the
of
case
witnesses.
We were discussing the case of a child that was born and whether it counts as the man's child or not? Wasn't that I don't know. It just seems like it's bringing in another element that wasn't in our original, that wasn't under discussion, and also it's really hard for me to imagine, which makes it even more.
Right. The Rav's description is a little bit different. You're saying the child. You're saying when he freed the slave woman, did he also marry her? Was there also witnesses to that? All right, it's a good point. I don't have an answer for you. It's a good point. The Rav seems to be assuming that he's talking about a penuya. He's really talking about the case of a penuya al penuya, which was also part of what the Gaonim were talking about. And he was saying that the Gaonim are correct when about a penuya and a penuya, when the people are not muhsach as avaryanim. But the Gaonim were only talking about with witnesses. When they're talking about a penui and a penuya, has to be witnesses. What else would there be? So here I wrote. You're right. I should add here with witnesses. The Gaonim hold bia with an unmarried woman is kiddushin. Obviously with witnesses. Did I spell witnesses? Anyway,
well, yeah, I think the whole yichud and hamanibiyah. That's their.
yeah, obviously there's witnesses. I didn't write witnesses at all of these because obviously there's witnesses. The Rosh holds that bia with a slave woman creates kiddushin, but with a single woman it does not. Right? He held by this. He said in general he agreed with the Rambam. The Ravid, I don't know why I put the Rambam last. The Ravid holds that a kosher unmarried Jews bia is kiddushin, like the Gonim. If they're kosher Jews, if they're not muhsach as parts as pizza. And the Rambam holds that bia with an unmarried woman is nut, not kiddushin, unless there is specific intent. So which do you think is going to the halacha follow? Well, based on what you know.
I would go according to the Rambam.
The halacha is like the Rambam. Just to be clear, the halacha is like the Rambam. All these other cases, we don't paskin like that. We paskin that there has to be specific intent. Just to know that
are you saying articulated intent?
Am I saying what?
When you say specific, do you mean articulated intent? I'm asking.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really getting into it. In other words, we can't. I didn't mean anything. I didn't mean anything. Okay. I just meant that there could be.
I'll pose that as a future question.
Okay.
To what degree does intent have to be articulated? Or not at all?
Right. I mean, I just sort of add, the Rambam didn't say this unless there is specific intent. I added that, but that's just because there is such a thing. He doesn't deny that there's such a thing as kiddushin al yedei bia. In fact, that's one of our sources will be the Rambam discussing that. That's right here. But wait, we're not there yet. Wait a second. So then wait here. Where are we? Okay, so we did the River. Then there's this Trumas Adeshin, which I gave you. And I divided it up now because first he quotes the Rambam, then Rav Alfas, then the Rosh, and then the Or Zarua. But we're not going to read all this. And then the Mordechai.
The riff's important. You're going to skip the riff?
I mean, they're all, as a posuk is important, but it doesn't say anything that's particularly new. Let's see, what did I write about the riff? I underlined one thing. This is an important point. Hanaf kamina shivcha da achrini, aval shivcha didei lo de'ein adam oseh. This is a great abbreviation. De'ein adam oseh biato biat znut. So that's by his own shifcha, but by a shifcha of somebody else that he can't free, then it is znut. So he kind of agrees with the Rosh. You see, there's a general agreement that by a shifcha it does work. And but the we'll see if there's an exception for a shifcha. We'll see what the Rambam holds. So far, we didn't see an exception for the shifcha. Now, I had this one section of the Trumat Adeshin that I underlined here. He says like this. Yeah, your time's up. I'll read this. Now we'll explain our question. Haramba va'ashiri shave. They're equivalent. Bezed adam haba al penuya afilu bifnei edim b'derech znut ein chosheshin beklum lekidushin kiduvar le'el. In other words, if it's penuya and a penui, then there's nothing. Not marriage. It's not kiddushin. Aval haba al shifchato pligi. But when it's a shifcha, they argue. B'svarot afuchot. Harambam savar the kol shekain hu the leicha lemichash b'shifchato lebilat kiddushin. The Rambam holds for sure by a shivcha, you're not going to assume that he did it for Kiddushin. The near and Tamo. And what's the reason for the Rambam? By a regular Jewish girl, then maybe he did Kiddushin. Because there's nothing lacking. In other words, she's available to be married. So maybe that's what he did. It says he could have done this Kiddushin for the shame of Kiddushin. So maybe he did. So we assume he did. This is the Rambam doesn't hold this, but this is why it's a kol shekain. This is explaining why it's a kol shekain for the shivcha. The Rambam doesn't believe all this, but you could hold this. If we're going to try to say that it wasn't for his nut, we'd have to say that he freed her. Kvar. Maybe he didn't have time to really free her. Maybe he didn't do it. I don't know. I don't know exactly what it means, look me nafshe, but to hold himself. Vashiri saver adarab. The Shiri holds the opposite. Shifchato de bedidei lechud, that it's up to him to free her or not. Milta. V'gam lo tzrichi lemeimar deba aleha l'shem kedushin. We don't need to say that he came to her he had relations for the purpose of marriage. Ach kevan de amrinan shichara. But since we say that he freed her, v'shuv holid b'menu ben, and she had a child from him, but no who look called avar. We're going to assume that so that's his child. She didn't. It's not actually the same kedushin, I guess. L'kach amrinan vaday shichara. That's why we say for sure he freed her. Kedei shelo yivol ba bilat znut, that he shouldn't do a forbidden act of znut. To call bilat shivcha bilat znut tui, because having relations with a shivcha is by definition znut. Min Torah, it's a Torah avera. Kedei alfinan min lo yeh kadesh. You shouldn't have a kadesh or a kadesh. Aval penuya ba'alma, but by a regular girl,
woman.
Or woman, the regular woman, the ba'inan l'meimar vaday ba l'shem kedushin, kadesh lo tiyeh bilato bilat znut. Aha ikar l'meimar. There we might say that the shema he lo nitratza. Maybe she didn't want to be married to him. Leo lo isha. She didn't want to marry him. Oh, who eno chafetz ba, or he didn't want to marry her. Lisana ella sheyitzram tafkam, but their yetzer, their urges took over. Tafkam liznut yachad mina umina Torah eno asim. And from the Torah, this is not forbidden. Liznut im hapenuya. In other words, by the shivcha, it's an isser from the Torah to have relations with her unless you free her. By a penuya, it's not an isser from the Torah. So by the shivcha, a man is gonna free her, so he avoids an isser Torah. But by a penuya, he's anyway not going to do an isser Torah. So why would he do it l'shem kiddushin? Maybe he didn't. In other words, there's more reason to say by a shivcha. He's giving us the rationale why a shivcha is more likely to be freed because of the severity of the crime of having relations with a shivcha. But by a penuya, it's not a Torah prohibition, and therefore we don't assume that he did it for the shame of kiddushin. We assume that he did it for znut. Ashri nocholomar de Rabbeinu Chanana v'Rav Alfas v'Chavreihem dechayshin b'shivchato gabe penuya moded de lo chayshin. Now, even though they hold that the shift, even though the Rif and the Rach hold that by a shivcha you do worry that it's his son, and you don't do yibum. You don't, you do chalitza because maybe he really did have a son. And you don't know. It's a suffix, so we're going to hold like that. So they're molded there. The lochashin, but the lochashin of the kiddush. Wait, sorry. By a penuya, we don't have that assumption. Just like the Ashiri holds. So he's trying to say that the Rabbeinu Hananel and the Rif agree with the Rosh. Avaladata Rambam given the Hanhu Gaonim Chayshe B'Shivcha Kol Shekain Chayshe B'Penuya Kedemefarish Ach Ketivna Le'el Da Rambam Ashiri Shaveh B'Penuya Delo Chayshinan B'Ak the Kedushin. Okay, whatever. So he's just saying, he's just pointing out, really what we get from this is the rationale, the interesting rationale, that because it's an Isser, it's a more severe Isser, therefore you'll avoid it. But when it's only Isser de Rabbanan, you, the man or the woman will not do Kiddushin.
It's two things. It's both that it's a more severe Isser and it's that he can do it on his own. Like it's just an act that he does to free her. But also, I think it's not quite.
Oh, you're right. By the Kiddushin, it's a double act. By the Kiddushin, you need both of them to agree.
Right. And also, it's not
with a what? Right. So somebody who's not Jewish at all, you would have to marry.
And even that would even be harder.
I mean, you have to convert her, which is not him. He can't convert her. He can't convert her. It would have to be a basin.
I don't think we're talking about Kiddushin in both cases, right? In one case, we're talking about Kiddushin.
Right.
In one case, we're talking about Shichul.
Yeah, you're right. I think you guys, thank you for straightening me out there. Yeah, I think you're right. It's really just talking about Shechur, not Kiddush.
Well, I think it's talking about both.
No,
I think like potentially both.
Yeah.
Certainly the fact that like, I think it's basically saying, okay, like certainly we can assume there's Shechur and therefore also probably Kiddushin, because in the sense of like, if he's going to go to the trouble of freeing her and then having sex with her, why would he go to all that trouble if he could just have sex with a Pnuya and have a much simpler process? Right, and the like, as in like less concern for Isser. That like.
I thought you were right. I thought you were going to say once he's already freed her, he may also but then you have the problem that maybe.
I think basically the assumption is if he's having sex with a female slave, that he's freed. Why would he go to the trouble of freeing her and then having her if he?
But all we ever saw, all the examples,
when he easily could have done that with a Pnuya already.
But all the examples we saw is just a question of whether we are choshesh for it being his son, and therefore don't do yibum, and that doesn't require marriage. That's only if she's a goy, then it's not his son, and if she's a Jew, then it is his son, whether or not there's marriage. There was no example.
Yeah, I mean, kol shekain if we're just talking about shichur, like, as in, I think, like we bring it into the whole conversation, but like kol shekain if we're just talking about shichur, that like, again, if he could have just already had sex with a Pnuya.
It's not like every woman is jumping on this person. He loves this shifcha. It's not like he could have had sex.
Again, he loves this shifcha.
Lexi, I see you making the argument, but where do you see that argument coming up in the text? Where do you see that argument coming up in the text that why wouldn't he just if he's already freeing her? Why?
I mean, that's what it's talking about with the Isser. Right, that's what it's talking about with the whole.
No, there's an Isser.
The Isser from the Torah.
No, there's an Isser of having sex with her while she's a shifcha.
While she's a shifcha, not while she, like once he frees her, then she's no longer a shifcha, and having sex with her is not a sumin at Torah. It's
Can we just assume? Sorry, go for it.
I'm just saying, there's no reason to assume that there's kiddushin going on in the case of the shifcha, and nobody said there's kiddushin going on. We're comparing it.
I said that, and I think it's a fair assumption. But even if you want to ignore that, it's certainly the shichur like argument of, and that's what I like the most recently was saying, just the shichur bit, which it's saying here of like, if he just wants to have sex, lav l'shem kiddushin, like he could have had it again, not with this shifcha. As in, like, the whole idea, like, since he just for an Isser, why would he have usser sex without any shit? He could have lesser sex with a Pnuya.
No, he's having that option. That's the argument for why he's freeing her, because then he's having less usser sex with a Pnuya. But it's not. But there's no kiddushin involved in that case. It's comparing the two cases. Comparing are whether he's having sex with the Pnuya without doing kiddushin, or whether he's having sex with a shifcha without doing shichur. Those are the two cases that are being
Right,
compared.
no, I'm saying
I
that's
think the
like
question
a
with
base
the
level.
shikha is a
in
bit
one direction,
different.
and Ashiri says it's the kol sheken is in the other direction, but it's not two cases of kiddushin that are being compared.
I
I
think
mean, the reason that I originally thought like Lexi, that there was both is because it would still be znut if he didn't marry her. In other words, if he was having relations, if that's really a principle in action here, then in order to avoid his bia being znut, he'd have to do two things. He'd have to also free her and also marry her. But
no,
we didn't see anybody say
we
that.
assume that he frees her while he's having sex with her because that must be znut. Like, it doesn't have to do like through the act of marrying her, she has to be able to accept the marriage, right? So through doing bia, which is l'shem kiddushin, is freeing her at the same time, and I think that's how we should look at it.
Well, I also just think the whole idea, if you're talking about the reason that you were giving earlier of like, oh, he doesn't just want to go to any pnuya, he wants to have sex with shifcha because maybe he like has a affection for her, whatever. Like, if that's the reason he's freeing her, it's still, I think it's like a weird assumption for us to say, again, if we have this general principle that we think has at least some credence of enodam oseh bilato bilat znut. So say that he has this shivcha who he has some affection for, who he's going to free, but then do bilat znut with, as opposed to just doing bilat znut with someone who's already a pnuya. If he like likes her enough that he wants to have sex with her and not just during a pnuya, I feel like it makes more sense that we're assuming there's also kiddushin happening.
It does, right, but again, but Yavi's point is correct. We didn't see anybody say that.
I don't see anybody saying that.
Nobody said that. It makes sense, but nobody said that. Maybe we'll see somebody say that.
Well, when you say "Ein Adam oseh bilato bilat znut," that means he's making the bia to be.
Rabbi Landis, your connection is not good, Rabbi Landis. Well, anyway, if you we don't hear you, Rabbi Landis. But do you guys hear me?
Yeah.
The argument that the
articulate if the
argument that the Trumat Hadeshin was making, what we just read, is that only that the point is it's in his that there's a difference between a penuya where maybe she doesn't want, maybe he doesn't want. You need two people to agree, and by the shifcha you don't. Well, that only makes sense if he's not talking about marrying the shifcha.
Right.
That's the point. But fine. So at least according to the Trumat Hadeshin, there's no concept of freeing of marrying the shifcha after the freedom. But okay, let's go on. I actually brought here, the order of these sources is always very difficult to arrange. I reordered them, but here I just jumped right into the Shulchan Aruch. So and it's anyway good to see the Shulchan Aruch because that's what we're actually learning. So can I ask Sarah to read again? Is Sarah here? Or did Sarah?
Sure.
Oh, Sarah.
I'm here.
Here, go ahead.
Sorry, I was following along on the old source sheet, so it's going to take me a minute to get it to be a size that I can actually see it.
Okay.
Okay. Ein ha'isha nechshevet eshet ish, ela al yedei kedushin shenitgasha kira'oi. Aval im ba'alea derech znut shelo l'shem kedushin, eno klum, ve'afilu ba'alea l'shem ishut, beino uveina, eina nechshevet keishto, ve'afilu im yachdalo, ela adaraba kofinoto lo'otzia mi beito.
Okay, there's a lot here. So break it down for us.
Okay, so a woman is not considered married to a man except through appropriate kiddushin or something like that. But if he has sex with her in the way of znut, not for the purposes of kiddushin, that amounts to nothing. And even if he has sex with her for the purposes of marrying her, and they both, well, okay, then he's thought to be his, or she's thought to be his wife.
Eina. What is
right.
what does beino lebeina mean?
I was like a little confused what he's actually talking about.
Without witnesses?
The Adim, right?
Without witnesses.
It means no Adim, right?
Yes. In other words,
Okay.
he's out in the woods in Russia or something, or he's not out in the woods in Russia. He's in his house, but he didn't have. Nobody notices what's going on.
Right.
He has no obligation towards her.
But she's not considered his wife.
So, like between them, she's not considered like his wife. He has no legal obligation towards her because it's not a right way to be Mekadesh. That's how I read it, but I could be totally wrong.
And even if she is
right.
Okay.
Well, he'd have to. That's the question. Would he be forced by the Beit Din to release her?
As in to give her a get?
No, she doesn't need a get, but just
to send
does
her
the Beit Din going to get involved and say, get out of this? These two people can't be together.
That's the next line, right?
That's the next line seems to be, even if they have like some kind of monogamous relationship, then the Beit Din
right
forces.
So she's not his wife, and we don't allow this to continue. The Beit Din. But let's go back to the beginning part. He didn't talk about, one thing that's not mentioned here is, Ein Adam Oseh Biato Bidatznut. He talked about if he did it for znut, it's no good. Well, everybody agrees to that, right? I mean, even the Gaonim agree that if he did it for znut, they just say that it's not liznut if it's a panuya and a panuya.
Can we make a diuk on derech znut? So it's not like what his intention was, but like in a way that seems kind of licentious. So it's not about what's in his head. It's about like.
I wouldn't go that way. I wouldn't make too much of it. I wouldn't. I just think he's saying was. In other words, no, it's the opposite. In other words, it could be the same exact act. It could be done very tenderly. It could be, but it's called, if it was considered znut, because, well, he's making an opposition.
It's derech znut versus
derech znut versus kiddushin.
Or derech ishut, right?
Or derech ishut. Afilo l'shem ishut, he called it. Right. L'shem ishut or l'shem...
We don't have a term l'shem znut. So therefore, no, that's the parallel. They're just parallel terms. So you say derech znut and l'shem kiddushin.
I also have a question about kiddushin versus ishut. Thank you, Rabbi. I think you're 100% right. In other words, it's equivalent. Derech znut is the same as the opposite of that is l'shem ishut. Is there a difference between ishut and kiddushin? Ishut might be marriage, and kiddushin might be the initial act of marriage. Maybe it does. Maybe I'm making more than. Maybe there's no difference. But what my point was,
l'shem ishut sounds like he's doing ona, right? He has a legal obligation towards her to like give her sexual pleasure, and that's what he does it. He does it l'shem ishut.
In other words, that's my question. If which is like, what if you not doing it for the act of kiddushin, but you're doing it under the assumption that you're married. You're doing it as part of a marital act, but not for the purpose of initiating the marriage, but for the purpose of continuing the marriage.
I think Rabbi Landis is trying to say something, but you're on mute, Rabbi Landis.
Maybe if you turn your camera off.
I'm sorry. I've had these couples in my office. We're beyond kiddushin. We're in a state of ishus, they use whatever term they use, of ishut that's beyond kiddushin. We're interested in kiddushin. We're interested in the deal, the signing of the deal. They took a cop, whatever it is, here's the ring, or it's the bia, whatever that is. So your chakira is correct, Rabbi.
Okay.
It's kiddushin.
Okay. Wait. What's my fakira? Which way are you coming out, Rabbi?
I'm saying is that ishut might be some form of living together, but we're interested in the initial, the act that makes ishut.
Right. So let me summarize what we just read. You need to get married with kiddushin, with witnesses. It needs to be in public in the sense that it's not beino levein atzma. You need to have witnesses to attest to it. And on the surface, it seems that he's passing like the Rambam. In other words, just people having, if it's no specific intent for kiddushin, then we're not going to apply and say ein adam oseh b'yad, and therefore it must have been marriage. We're going to say no, it's derech znut. There is an alternative way to try to read it and to say no. He's saying, he's not addressing that question, and he's just talking about if we know for sure it's znut and we know for sure it's kiddushin, and if we don't know, then he's not talking about that. But that would leave us in a very bad place. So I think it's better to say that what he's saying is ein ha'isha nichshevet isha el, kiddushin ki ra'ui, and then anything else is znut, and he's passing like the Rambam, and that's how everybody understands. But Reuven, you want to say something?
Yeah, quick question. Like, if we are to interpret beno lebena by themselves, so then there's no chiddush here, right? Obviously, she's not his wife, because you need witnesses in order for it to be a proper wedding. So that's why I think beno lebena should be interpreted like within their own relationship. She's not nechshevet l'ishto, which means that he has no legal obligation towards her, or else he would be redundant.
No.
Obviously, that beno lebena, she's not nechshav k'ishto. Like, there is no havamina that she would, because you do need witnesses in order for a marriage to happen, regardless of how.
Well, that's what he's teaching us here. He's teaching us that. He doesn't need to
teach us that, because, obviously.
No, I think that's what he's saying here. I think that he's saying that we first he said that you need it to be l'shem kiddushin and not l'shem ishut, and then he says, and even if it is l'shem kiddushin, it needs to be it can't be, let's say, it can't be a private matter. It has to have witnesses.
We know that already. I mean, like, what's the chiddush here? It's like, in order for it to be l'shem ishut, like you said it earlier, that you need to have two witnesses, or else it's not a contract. So that's why I'm thinking that we should interpret beno lebena differently. But I could be totally wrong.
Well, I think that the commentators understand it the way I'm saying it, but maybe we'll see. Maybe we'll when we see the tour and we go through everything, maybe it'll be more correct at what I'm saying. But I hear what you're saying. Let's look at the Haga'ah. Sarah, you want to read the Ramah here? Wait, unmute yourself.
Sorry. Devadai bushahi min litbol velo ba'ale benidata from the tour. Aval im mi'ached elav isha v'tovelet elav yesh omrim shemutar v'hu pilegesh hamura b'torah.
Exactly. See, that's actually Reuben. That's the chiddush. That's what he's coming to say. In other words, let's go back now. What he's coming to say is that if he did it beino levein atzma, he didn't have witnesses, so there's no kiddushin proper. But maybe it's a pilegesh, and maybe that would be allowed. And he's saying, no. That's what the Mechaber is saying, no. And it comes on the Ramah says, if it was private, so she is bosh, she's embarrassed to go to the mikveh. In fact, nowadays they wouldn't even let her in, but she's embarrassed to go to the mikveh. And therefore he's having relations with her when she's in nida, and that's why we're going to stop this relationship, because they're not observing the laws of nida. Aval im miyached elav isha, but if he does the same, miyached means without witnesses. That's what miyached means. He appoints her. He himself says, "You're my wife." He doesn't go through the proper rules of kiddushin. He just does that. So that's exactly the case of Yichet, of Mechaber. V'tovel et alav. Yesh omrim shemuter. He doesn't say that. Those that argue on the Mechaber, and that's called a pilegish. And that is the Ravid. We didn't see the Ravid yet. It was a different Ravid we saw. Okay? Wait, anyone want to argue with me? or give me a point here. All right, let's Sarah, just finish up this this Ramah, and
I just ask one question first. When you said, what do you think miyached alav really means? Like, in other words, he like says, yes, you're my wife, or just like they seem to be together and not with other people.
I think it's also about exclusivity.
That's what I assumed it to be about exclusivity, but it seemed like Rav Nachum was saying something different. So I was wondering.
Yeah, I feel like Rav Nachum, you were using language almost more of like ye'ud, of like designation, whereas I feel like miyached is like he chooses her as his exclusive partner.
No, miyached it's not used here as a general word. It's a specific halachic action. It's a specific halachic action, which is the creation of a pilegish, and it's called yichud. In other words, you say this woman is my pilegish, and therefore she's for, like, and therefore there's certain laws that apply to her. Wait, Rebbe Landis.
Yeah, no. There is exclusivity. There is exclusivity here. He's miyached her so that she can't sleep with anybody else.
It's like a kind of kiddushin.
You are quote unquote my woman. It might not be wife, it might be pilegish, but that means you can't sleep with anybody else.
She's not a zona. She's not a zona. She's not going around with anybody. No, there is some kind of exclusivity, but my point is, but
yeah,
it's an
exclusivity on her part.
It's not saying, but if she's exclusive to him and she's tovel, then it's a pilegish. It's not saying that if she is exclusive to him. It's saying if he did the act of excluding her to himself.
Yes,
there's a specific action that he has to do.
Yeah, but
so you are my pilegish, and now there's certain laws that apply to you. You can't be with other men, and that's the pilegish.
Yeah. Okay.
V'yesh omrim, go on, Sarah.
V'yesh omrim she'asur v'lo kinal zeh mishum lo tieh kadesha.
The Rama, we didn't see these Ramas. We're going to see them next time. Okay, go ahead.
Kuti shenasa kutit v'chein mumar shenasa mumeret v'nimusehen v'nitgaru achar kach. Ein kan chashash kedushin klal umuter latzeit mimenu v'lo get af al pi sheshaha ima kama shanim einu ela kiznut be'alma. Should I keep going?
No, so we'll explain that.
Okay, so there are some people who say that that's not that it's allowed, but actually it's asur, and you are lokian for we give you punishment for that.
And not only that, but it's called a kadesha.
It's called a kadesha, and it's asur mina Torah, it seems, right? Like right. You're lokeh for this specific biblical provision. Okay.
Kadesha is a pilegish, right? That's kind of a strong statement.
Right. Like it seems here that like pilegish and kadesha are like overlapping.
Yeah, we're not clear on these terms, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's clear on these terms.
Right. But like whoever, like the people in the Yesh Omrim camp seem to be thinking something like that.
Yes, they're saying that's exactly what he's saying. Yeah, that a kadesha is this pilegish. Pilegish is a kadesha.
Right. Okay. So then, kuti shenasa, so a non-Jew who marries another non-Jew, and then they convert. I assume that the mumar and the mumeret are not shenit gairu, but just they like are chozrim b'tshuva or something. They're like not mumarim anymore. Those people, we don't need to worry that they've done kiddushin and they can go on and marry. They can.
Right. This is.
He can go out and marry someone else without a get. Even if they've been with each other for a long time, because that's just znut.
Right. So this is talking about like, your common law marriage, or even Jews who don't want to get married in the rabbanut, or don't want to get married not even with any rabbi. They want to get married, with their own idea of how to get married, without a religious marriage, basically, right there. I mean, right, benimusehen, in their customs. I mean, well, I'm extending it. Literally, all he's saying is they got married as Christians. They got married with a Christian, but they're mumar, but they got married with Christian practices. So there's no kiddushin here. And notice he calls it znut, ba'alma. So I would say that the word znut here is meant in a non-pejorative way. It's just saying there's two alternatives. Either it's ishut or znut. And so this is not ishut, even though they're two Jews. That's not called ishut because they did it in a Christian way. Interesting question is, does that also apply to somebody who did it in no way? They said they're married. I don't know. What do you think? Is there any reason to differentiate those two cases?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
It seems like we have been saying before that Beilat Znut is something that Ein Adam Oseh Beilato, Beilat Znut is something that the man does, but to become a zonah is something that happens to the woman. So if in this case it's Znut Be'alma, the consequences for him of doing an Avila are nothing. But the consequences to her of potentially engaging in behavior that would be legitimate under her custom or under her current status would prevent her from marrying a Kohen or all these other things if they're conceiving of Znut.
So we're going to see. So in my sources later on, you're going to see that there's a discussion about where there's an opinion that says a Penuya Baal Penuya makes a zonah. We don't paskin like that. And even the Shulchan Aruch is not paskin like that. We're not calling her a zonah in the sense that she's forbidden to a Kohen. She's not forbidden to a Kohen. She could marry a Kohen. We're just calling her a zonah because that's the alternative term as opposed to describe bia when it's not in the context of marriage. But she's not actually a zonah. And it would be forbidden. And also I disagree with, also let's make one more thing that he said. He's saying it's not a problem for the man. It is. All those years that he's living with her are all averot because she's a penuya. Right? It's not a marriage.
Well, we've said that it's not an avera to be living with a penuya.
Rabbanan.
No, it's not even a durabanan avera. That's the whole thing we've been saying. If they have an exclusive relationship and they've been living together, like maybe there's averot if they're having sex.
According to the Rambam, it's a issa deraita. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, but according to literally like almost everybody else, just living with a penuya.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. We just read the Shulchan Aruch says you have to take them out of the house. You can't let them stay there. And
all of the commentators are saying that that's like the concern, the actual Isser that exists is the Nida one. But that when it comes to just living with a Penuya, or even just having sex with Penuya, if you can assume that she's able to Tovel, there's no Isser.
No. There's an Isser de Rabbanan. You'll see.
At least a number of the opinions don't think there's any Isser. They might not think it's great, but they don't think there's an Isser.
There was that wording in the Rosh that the issue is that he brings up Nida as the issue, but then other commentators say, like, what do you mean? How can it just be that Nida is the only issue? I don't think it's as universal as, yeah.
No, if anything, there's a statement that commentators.
That it exists and that it's not necessarily L'Shem Kiddushin, but that doesn't mean that it's allowed.
As in, there isn't language in most of the commentators of things about this being like an Isur. Like even most of the people, I feel like most of the commentators try and tame down the way that the Torah is presenting the Rosh, because the Rosh, in fact, has like less of an anti-Pelegesh stance than I think the Torah.
Well, the ones who hold that Pelegesh is mutar hold that as long as you're miyached her, then it's mutar. But if you're not miyached her, and it's just what we're going to see, I don't want to. Whatever.
I mean, in
we
what
can't
scenario
read.
Are you?
If you read all of my sources, you'll see that that is an issue. At least some hold. It certainly it is. I'm not seeing it right now. I'll send you after class because we're finished for today. But
I read all of the ones on the sheet, and I get that the Rambam thinks it's an Isser. I just think that the majority of the other opinions don't think there's an Isser. Again, I don't think they say, like, I think most of them aren't like, yes, it's great, please go get a pilagesh. Like, even those who are like, yes, it
What do you do?
actually,
What do you do with the Shulchan Aruch?
I think the Shulchan Aruch is going like l'chumra, essentially, I think going after the idea that we see even in the Ramban, who also is very much like it's not an Isser. We don't want to paskin that there isn't a problem with pilagesh because we're worried basically about people. We think that if we say
I mean, the
that
Shulchan Aruch is saying you're not allowed. First of all, right? The Shulchan Aruch is saying, well, that the Shulchan Aruch is saying you have to get her out of your house. Then he says, the Haggah says the reason is because she doesn't tovel, which would imply that if you knew that she is tovelet, then the Shulchan Aruch might not say what he's saying. That's what you're
right,
that's your
which
point.
I think is again the pshat of the Rosh that he's working off of like the Rosh, where it's like if you look at the larger context of the Rosh that the Torah quoted, like first of all, he's not saying the Beit Din can actually force her out. He's basically being like, because I think multiple commentaries say that like.
Yeah, but look at the Ramah. But look at the Ramah. I mean,
like,
you can't say what you're saying. I mean, yeah, Lexi, just look at these words here. Yesh Omrim Shasur. Even no, it's not the Rambam. It's the Rambam, the Rosh, and the Tur. You can't tell me that most people say it's mutter when the Rambam and the Rosh and the Tur all say that it's Asr and Lokin alav. Mishum lo, it's Asr Deraita. Even where she's tovelet. So don't tell me most people say. I got three very strong opinions.
Reading of the, I mean, I don't, whatever. I can't be like Palig Mamish on the remote. I just don't think that that's a good.
Well, we'll have to look at the tour and the Rambam and the commentaries on the Rambam. Look at the Rambam.
He talks about fulfilling Priya Rivia with the Pilagesh.
I can't. Your internet is no good. Maybe put your video off.
I know my internet's terrible. Can you hear me right now?
Now I hear you. But if you put your video off, it might be better.
Okay, just the Rosh Hashanah Tshuva where he talks about fulfilling Priya Rivia with the Pilagesh. I just don't think you'd be talking about the fact that there aren't mamish brachot on Erusin and Nisuin because you can do Priya Rivia, which is the only mitzvah.
No, that's not a proof of anything. Because
but also actually it's a significant Isser.
Even if it's Asr to have a Pilagesh, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not doing Priya Rivia. I don't see the connection.
But he never says it's Asr to have a Pilagesh.
Well, anyway, all I can say is that I have here in black and white that at least the Ramah is holding that the Rambam, the Rosh, and the Tur are all saying that it's Asr D'Oraita. And we'll see. Look at the Rambam and look at the commentaries on it. Look at the Maggid Mishnah, look at the Kesef Mishnah, and read where the Rambam discusses this, which I brought down.
I don't disagree that that's the Rambam's opinion.
No, but read what the Maggid says, whether they agree with him. You see? Before you say that everybody argues on the Rambam, see if they argue on him. Maybe the commentaries on the Rambam agree with him. I spent a lot of time actually looking at those. I didn't assign those, but it's very interesting. We're doing Shulchan Aruch really, but it would be almost equally interesting to do the Rambam and the commentaries on the Rambam here. Where did I bring the Rambam? Here's the Rambam, Hilchos Ishus, Perek Aleph. Very, very important. Everyone quotes this. These four halachot. And the Ravid argues on him. We're going to discuss this. Here's the Kesef Mishnah. It talks about it. We'll discuss it. Okay, guys, we're done.
Sorry, just quick note. The Beit Shmuel himself uses the raya that I was trying to use from the Priya Rivia thing. There's a quote in the Beit Shmuel on that Ramah ויש ראיה מדברי הראש ריש כתובות דלקה איסור בפילגש, שהרי כתב שם די יכול לקיים פרי אביה בפילגש.
Yeah, okay.
So,
fine. Yeah, okay, I hear you. But I still would like to hear an answer to Mike. What's the connection? So what's the connection? Why should there be connection? Why can't I do? I mean, I can't do Piri Rivia with a Nida. Nida is also Isser, but I did Piri Rivia. I mean, why does it prove that the fact that I didn't do an Isser, that I did Piri Rivia, that means I didn't do an Isser?
No,
if I went to
again,
if I had relations with a Nida, I did Piri Rivia.
I can't summarize it into tshuva, and I can look at the language more specifically, but it's basically being like the bracha for marrying isn't a bracha on a mitzvah because you can like effectively fulfill this mitzvah another way. And if you said there's no permitted other way to fulfill this mitzvah, it would seem a little crazy to say like, no, you don't need to say a bracha on, like it's not a proper bracha on a mitzvah because you can do prior revia in other ways. Sure, they're forbidden, but you can do it. That seems like a very non-intuitive argument.
Mm-hmm. I hear what you're saying, but I think that's that what you're referring to. You're saying why we don't say a bracha on a mitzvah. Those are more like after the fact explanations and not generative statements. Those statements are not to generate the law. Those are just
it's about saying, it's not about why we don't say a bracha. It's about the fact that Rosh arguing that the brachot we say, that like Sheva brachot basically aren't, that they're basically just like Shevach, that they're not actually like mamish brachot.
Fine, I don't want to get too far afield, but line up, I mean, whatever, bring me, you can send me after class some sources that you would think are proving this, and I'll try to send you something the other way. All right, but we're finished for today. We'll continue in these sheets next time. Okay, guys?
Thank you.
Sure. Yishar koyach to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.